Confidence isn't about never being afraid or having doubts. It's about trusting yourself enough to act even when you are afraid or have doubts. In the heart of the African savanna, where the sun paints the sky with golden hues and life pulses with every breath of the gentle wind, lived Simba, a lion whose once majestic mane now hung like faded curtains around a face that had forgotten how to roar. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when Simba's roar echoed for miles across the plains, a sound that made the earth tremble and other animals acknowledge his presence with respect. He walked with the confidence of one who knew his place in the world, each step a declaration of his inner strength, each gaze a promise of protection for those he loved. Simba was the kind of lion that other young males secretly admired. He knew when to lead and when to follow, when to fight and when to walk away with dignity. His voice carried weight not just because of its volume, but because of the wisdom that emanated from every word. When Simba spoke, others listened, not out of fear, but out of genuine respect. But life, like a patient hunter, had prepared a series of blows that no mane, however thick, could protect him from. First came the prolonged drought that tested his ability to lead the pride through difficult times. Then a territorial dispute he lost, not from lack of courage, but from circumstances beyond his control. Next, the loss of a beloved cub to a disease that all his strength couldn't combat. Each defeat, each loss, each moment when his strength wasn't enough was as if someone were silently stealing pieces of his roar. At first, the changes were subtle. Simba still tried to lead, but his voice came out slightly lower. He still made decisions, but hesitated for a few seconds before acting. He still positioned himself at the front of the pride, but his eyes sought validation where once there had been only certainty. The other members of the pride began to notice, though no one knew exactly how to address it. "Simba seems tired lately," Nala, his mate, murmured to a friend. "Maybe it's just a phase," the friend replied, both avoiding mentioning the obvious. The king of the savanna was losing his inner royalty. Simba developed a dangerous skill. He learned to roar on the outside while whispering on the inside. To the outside world, he still seemed like the same confident lion, but internally, a critical voice had installed itself like a parasite in his thoughts. "You're not strong enough anymore," the voice whispered. "Remember the last time you tried to lead? Remember what happened? Better stay quiet this time." Self-esteem, he discovered, was like sand. The more you try to hold it tightly, the more it slips through your fingers. The more Simba tried to force confidence he didn't feel, the more obvious it became to everyone around him that something fundamental had changed. He began avoiding situations where his leadership might be tested. When other lions asked questions he would have once answered with natural authority, now he averted his gaze and mumbled vague responses. Most painful of all was that Simba still had the same physical strength, the same intelligence, the same skills he had always possessed. But now, between him and his ability to use them, there was an invisible barrier made of doubt, fear, and an inner voice that had become his worst enemy. "Who do you think you are?" the voice would ask whenever he considered taking a firm stand. "Remember the last time you tried to be brave? Remember how it ended?" And Simba, tired of fighting this constant voice, began to shrink himself down to a size that seemed safer, more protected from failure. He watched other lions, especially the younger ones, with a mixture of nostalgia and envy. "I used to be like that," he thought, seeing them roar with the uncomplicated confidence of youth. "I used to believe in myself like that." But the longer he remained silent, the harder it became to remember what it felt like to trust his own voice. Simba's family noticed the change, but didn't know how to help. They tried to encourage him. "You're a great leader, Simba. We believe in you." But their well-intended words bounced off the armor of self-doubt he had built. "They're just being kind," his inner voice translated. "If they really knew me, they wouldn't say that." The turning point came from an unexpected source. Kessie, an old and wise elephant who had observed Simba since he was young, approached him during a particularly melancholic sunset. Simba was sitting alone, staring at the horizon as if searching for something he had lost. "You know," said Kessie, her voice carrying decades of experience. "I remember when you first roared as an adult. It wasn't the loudest roar I'd ever heard, nor the most technically perfect, but it had something special. It had your truth in it." Simba looked at her, surprised. "I don't roar like that anymore," he admitted, the words coming out like a confession. "No," Kessie agreed. "Now you try to roar how you think you should sound, instead of letting out the sound that's actually inside you. You're trying to be the lion you think you lost, instead of discovering the lion you've become." This conversation planted a seed of questioning in Simba. Maybe the problem wasn't that he had completely lost his voice. Maybe it was that he was trying to use a voice that was no longer authentically his. Maybe confidence wasn't about never having doubts, but about trusting himself even with the doubts. Simba started small. Instead of trying to immediately recover his full roar, he began practicing simply speaking his truth in smaller conversations. When someone asked his opinion, instead of deflecting or giving an answer they thought they wanted to hear, he tried to respond honestly, even if his voice trembled a little. "I'm not sure," he learned to say. Discovering that admitting uncertainty didn't make him appear weaker. It actually made others feel more comfortable sharing their own doubts. "I'm learning," he began adding to conversations, realizing that vulnerability and strength weren't opposites. Slowly, Simba began to understand that his confidence hadn't disappeared, it had evolved. The naive confidence of his youth, based on never having failed seriously, had been replaced by something deeper. The confidence of someone who had failed, learned, and chosen to keep trying. He began to challenge the critical inner voice. "You're right," he would say to it. "I have failed before, and I'll probably fail again. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try." Gradually, the voice lost some of its power over him, not because it disappeared, but because he stopped treating it as an unquestionable authority. One day, when a young lion in the pride was being intimidated by a group of hyenas, Simba felt something familiar stir in his chest. It wasn't the old, uncomplicated confidence, it was something richer, more tested. He stood up, walked to where the situation was unfolding, and roared. The sound that came out wasn't identical to his youthful roar. It was deeper, carried more weight, had nuances of experience that hadn't existed before. But it was authentically his, charged with the entire journey he had traveled, including the failures and doubts. The hyenas backed away, not just because of the volume of the roar, but because of the genuine authority it carried. The young lion looked at Simba with gratitude and admiration. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How are you always so confident?" Simba smiled. "I'm not always confident," he replied honestly, "but I've learned that confidence isn't about never being afraid or having doubts. It's about trusting yourself enough to act even when you are afraid or have doubts." From that day forward, Simba began to understand that he hadn't lost his inner voice. He had allowed other voices to muffle it. His journey wasn't about going back to who he was before, but about integrating all his experiences into a more complete and authentic version of himself. He learned to distinguish between the voice of wisdom, which protected him from real dangers, and the voice of fear, which prevented him from living fully. He learned that self-esteem isn't about thinking you're perfect, but about accepting that you're worthy of love and respect even with your imperfections. Most importantly, Simba discovered that his inner voice wasn't just about roaring loudly to the world. It was about speaking gently to himself, about being his own ally instead of his worst critic. He learned to encourage himself the same way he would encourage a dear friend. The pride noticed the change. It wasn't that Simba had gone back to being exactly as he was before. He was different, deeper, more genuine. His leadership now came from a place of acknowledged vulnerability and tested strength, and this made him not just a more effective leader, but also more accessible. If you're a lion who has lost your roar, remember Simba's journey. Your inner voice hasn't disappeared. It's waiting patiently under layers of self-criticism and fear. Your confidence doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. And sometimes, the most authentic roar comes from someone who knows both the sound of silence and the power of their own voice. Your voice deserves to be heard. Your confidence deserves to be rebuilt. And you deserve to treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer to the dearest of friends. Because the strongest lions aren't those who never doubted themselves. They're those who learn to roar even through the doubt. Subscribe to the channel for more wisdom from the Savanna of the mind and learn to rediscover the strength that has always been within you.